Good morning, heart failure. Good to speak to you again. It's now 10:30 on Monday, Tuesday rather, November the 5th. And for those of you who are in Saudi Arabia, could I just remind you that November the 5th is the day in Britain where there is the ritual burning of Catholic terrorists, and on this day, November the 5th, every year, um, people go around a bonfire where there is an effigy of a Catholic terrorist being burnt and chant, "Remember, remember the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason, and plot." So that's today for you. And what have I had this week? Well, most of what I've had this week has been on the discussion board. And the first one I want to start off with our old friend Delphine. Delphine is always a reliable correspondent on this course, and she describes the journey that a patient will get. Okay, let me just explain. I noticed when I went into the discussion board that Delphine has replied to a lesson which I thought wasn't due to be revealed until late November, early December. But when I went in and took a look, there it was, bold as brass. The lesson on building a heart failure service, I intended to come up much later on in the course, but it's there. But it was there anyway. I've taken it down again. It was there, and Delphine has replied to the exercises on it. Good for you, Delphine. And she describes the structure of the progress that a patient will have in Saudi Arabia when they are in hospital with a heart condition. First of all, there's the critical care element, there's the coronary care element, and then there's step down from coronary care to a more general facility. The patient then gets intensive education, and then they are discharged. They're followed up in an outpatient clinic, and she said that they are just about to start offering them exercise. And I wonder, Delphine, whether or not you're offering the patients exercise in the regular post-coronary rehabilitation, or whether you have your own specialist rehabilitation planned for just patients who've got heart failure. There's, mostly in the UK, people with heart failure get thrown in with people who are post-infarct, and they are closely observed by nurses with a cardiovascular background. So all of those, though that trip, the critical care, step down, education, discharge, follow up and exercise, all of that would be completely familiar to anyone in the UK, I would have thought. And my guess is America too. We'll come back to that later. The next correspondent that I've had is Shirley, who answered the intended questions for this week. Yes, and I wonder, considering so much has been written, this comment will go for Rachel as well, Rachel M. Considering that these patients are supposed to have so much cognitive dysfunction on them, you've both emphasised the importance here of educating the patients. But I wonder if the patients are up to it. Do they remember? If all this literature says that patients with waterlogged brains can't remember anything, then what is the point of making them sit through lectures where they're being told the details of what their medication is going to do, because they won't remember it? Unless the cognitive dysfunction that these articles speak about is minor, and it doesn't stop you managing your life. It's just that you can't remember phone numbers the way you used to. Or is it more that you're vague and woolly and you just can't retain? What I'm asking here is, if that's the case, if they are really woolly and can't think properly because of their heart failure, does it make sense to expect them to sign consent forms, for instance? Should they be able to change their wills if heart failure has rendered their thinking so disordered that they can't really make sense of the situation, and perhaps therefore are being subject to overbearing influence from possibly their children or spouses? I don't know. I'm not saying I've got an answer to this, but on the one hand, I read all these articles that say that patients can't think properly once they've got heart failure on them. And on the other hand, yeah, but it's really important to educate them, and it's really important to guarantee compliance with complex medical regimes of taking tablets, complex self-inspection. I don't know how to make sense of this, and I never have. What's more, but on the other hand, when I do meet patients with heart failure, they don't strike me as being below the threshold of being able to understand or remember. So I'm agreeing with current practice. It's just that I don't know. Rachel M again. Rachel M. We're talking about patient information. When I was in France a number of years ago, looking at the heart failure services over there, the education process that they forced the patients through was really intense. It almost was the case that patients would need to sit an exam at the end of their rehabilitation. But one of the things that they used, one of the teaching aids that they used, was the dietitian, and it was always a dietitian who educated patients about food and salt and all that sort of stuff. The dietitian would have 6 1-gram sachets of salt, and they would sit with the patients and they would say, this is how much salt you can have in a day. How much do you think is in a loaf of bread? How much do you think is in this, that, this? And they would basically spend the amount of salt on whatever dish that the patient was talking about eating, or whatever dish that the patient said that they often ate for their dinner. And they made patients keep food diaries, and therefore they would assess for the patient on the basis of their food diary what the patient had ate that week, how much sodium they were actually eating. It wasn't just a question of, oh, next time you cook rice, don't put any salt in. It was a question of what are you actually eating? How much sodium does that contain? You've spent all of your salt entitlement, so why aren't you making extra efforts to reduce the amount of sodium intake that you're having? In this country, I think the education regarding salt is a bit more relaxed than that. Nobody tries to define how much a patient is eating in the way of salt. It's basically, if you know of a salty food, don't eat it. Don't put any salt in potatoes. Don't put any salt on your dinner, and don't add it while cooking. Avoid pre-packaged foods, for instance. Perfectly good. Obviously, that's perfectly good. But it was more relaxed than in France. That's what I'm saying. The other thing that occurs to me to wonder about you lot over in Saudi Arabia is, what do you tell your patients when it's really, really hot, about not taking fluids and about salt restriction? I wrote a paper a number of years ago on the subject of heart failure and heat. I'm going to put it onto Blackboard in just a minute. But I wonder what you in Saudi Arabia tell people with temperatures of 40, 45 degrees. Do you modify what it is that you say to patients to take account of their heat, to take account of their extra fluid loss in heat? Or do you just go by NICE guidelines, American Cardiac Association guidelines? What is it that you do over there? I'd love to know. But anyway, there's been nothing from the Mail. last week was a strike week. I'm sorry about that, but you know, there you are. That's life. Um, and I'll see those of you who are face to face. I shall see you on Thursday. So good morning, everybody.